Hello, welcome to the October 3rd, 2025 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you have not attended a livestream before, how it works is you could simply ask questions in the live chat field or send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, realize that my ability to answer questions in a real-time manner may soon be eclipsed and I may be behind. So if you don't get an immediate response to your question, we'll go through all the questions asked in order chronologically. And if we could avoid asking the same question repeatedly, that would be appreciated. It just makes it easier for me to get through more questions. When asking questions, if you could specify which version of Cubase you are running. So if it is Cubase 12, 13, 14, if it's a level of LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, that information is often helpful. And which operating system. We should have an index of all topics that are discussed in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field. After the live stream, I may be later than usual. I have to go to like a school social function. So maybe tomorrow afternoon, or late tonight. So just want to give a quick heads up with that. But if you wanted to search for topics, and we could do that. And if you wanted to search for like over 41,000 topics that we've covered, you can go to cubaseindex.com, and we want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating that. We also have two people that serve as moderators, Jazz Dude and Agent K. They're not Steinberg employees, they just make it a better community experience. So we'll give special thanks to them for their efforts. And we'll also give an extra round of gratitude, express our gratitude for Jazz Dude for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. So it's a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work with Yamaha Corporation of America, and I primarily focus on Steinberg products. And I'm the host today. I'm presenting from the United States, outside of Washington, D.C. area, from Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching us live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you live. And with that, we will go ahead and begin. All right, so we have a question from Patrick. Almost a little over 2 hours ago. It says, hey, sorry for asking so early, but I need this as soon as possible. Is it possible to control MIDI CCs for a string section from a single track or region instead of recopying data across tracks? Okay, so let's say if I want to come over here, all right, and I want to take a particular string sound, and I want to take let's say the MIDI CCs across multiple parts. So if we just simply place our MIDI CCs in different, I'm just going to select these three tracks here, and I'm just going to record, let's say, my modulation, a CC controller. So I'll just come over here. Okay, so now we've recorded that MIDI CC message across three different tracks at once. So, it's pretty easy just to, if we wanted to record that particular CC information, we don't necessarily have to draw it in. We could just physically put Cubase and record and move your mod wheel. Now, if we have all three parts and we want to make an edit on one and easily copy it over to others, I'm going to select the three events here in the project window. We'll go into our editor. I'll take this into full screen editor. So let's say we have, okay. Let me see if I have actual notes. I'll just draw some notes in here. So let's say I'll just record some MIDI notes in, and I'll change my MIDI record mode here to merge. Okay. right, let me just do this one more time. Sorry. Okay, so let's say we have all of these parts selected where we see our MIDI notes and our CCs. So let's say in this instance, I want to take this MIDI CC data and just kind of crop this one. So I'm going to edit this, and I want to apply that to my other parts. So when I come over here, I can see that when I select the cello, the violin, that the viola part is going to be different. All right, so what you can do is just come over here, let's say select all events on this lane, and you can say, okay, I want to come over to the viola part, and we'll say, okay, we're going to select the viola part here. And if I just do an Alt or Option plus V, we can now come over. So let me just select. So I'm going to select these events here, and I'm going to copy. So if we come over here to viola, I can now do an Alt or Option V, and that will automatically kind of paste the events. So if I select my cello and hit Alt or Option plus V, we could then take that copied CC data over, and we could assign this like to, let's say, where we activate our particular events here. So let's say if we want to go to our MIDI remote, so we take a look at our MIDI remote, we could actually assign activate previous part or activate next part in part of the MIDI remote. So if I just wanted to come over here, let's go to, if we just search in the functions browser, we could also assign a keyboard shortcut. And so we can see that we could have activate next part, activate previous part, and we could also kind of assign this in a macro as well. So I made a macro, I haven't tested it yet. Made it right before we started, but let's get to the key commands. And what I want to do is we'll say paste MIDI CCs downward. So we can say we want to activate the next part, paste at origin. So we'll come over, I'm going to open up my MIDI editor for all three events again if we wanted to kind of speed this up. And I'll take it full screen here. All right, so you can see that we are on our violin part. So I want to copy. I'm going to select all the events on the lane and copy. And now at this point, I'm going to run the macro. So the macro is going to activate the next part and paste at origin. So if we watch our part here, so it should switch from violin to viola. And then when we come over here, let's do it for the cello part. All right, so now when we look at our different parts, we can now have that particular MIDI CC data. So we look at our viola part, our cello part, our violin part. So if we wanted to edit this independently, when we go back, we can see the copied data that we pasted from the viola part or directly from our cello part. So that's an easy way to kind of copy and paste to kind of make it a bit more automated. So let me know if when you see that, if that works for you, Patrick. All right, we see Stefan joining from Sweden. We have Benny also joining from Sweden. Always wonderful to see Jazz Dude on. Great to have you on the Zoom social meetup. We see Tim K joining from Zeist in the Netherlands. His cat buddy is waving a paw hello, and he's ready to learn. We have Uno Memento joining from Finland. Tony Trunzo from a very early morning in Australia. Thanks for joining us. Razel Zamini from Denmark. All right. I see Jazz Dude saying hi, Greg, and welcome everyone in the Cubase Nation. All right. We have Jahian L. Price saying greetings from Granada Hills, California. All right. All right, we have Jan from Cubase Index in Stockholm. Always wonderful to see Jan. Appreciate what you do with the Cubase Index. All right, Joel Plimmer says this is awesome, switching from DP, and I'm excited for Insight. Yeah, so let me know if you saw the email about the automation points. I'll show that later in the live stream towards the end, Joel. But great to see you on. We have Lawrence from Rhode Island, Barn Door Recording. Michael Teams saying howdy from Weatherford, Texas. To myself, Jan and Jazz Dude. So always wonderful to have you on, Michael. And he wants everyone to whack the like button. All right, Michael Marshall sending greetings from Somerset in the UK. Great to see you on the live stream social meetup on Tuesday. We see John Costigan joining from Kenosha, Wisconsin. All right, and Michael Teams has granted my family and myself 1 gallon of Texas fresh strawberry ice cream. Sounds good. My son will appreciate it. Okay, so you see Jazz Dude says, don't forget to send the latest project, the logical editor presets. If you send me like a brain cramp email reminder, I'll make sure to do that. All right, Animal One says, Greg, thanks for your work. Could you please tell, is when duplicating events notes with control left or right, what's the best way to move it by a lesser grid size? Okay, so let's say if we have notes here, or I guess we could take our existing notes. All right, so when we have this, we can adjust to our grid size here. So let's say, okay, so when I hold down Control or Command plus my left or right arrow, we can just kind of come right over here. So I think if we choose our, so we may have to, if you're in the MIDI editor, so let's see if we have the nudge command here. All right, so when we go to our nudge, let me just, we can see this where we could have it linked to grid. So we see this here. If we kind of, expand this over just a little bit. So let's say I want this to be nudged by eighth notes. So we could now just come over here and adjust the nudge by eighth notes if we want it to be by 16th notes, by eighth note triplets. We can just come over here and just as we hold down Control or Command plus the right arrow to nudge it over towards the right, or the left arrow to nudge it earlier in times the right arrow later. But we could, and if you don't see the nudge, right click in the area here and just activate nudge. And then we could also choose, so right now it's linked to grid, but I could also, if my main timeline is set to bars and beats, but maybe I want to nudge it by milliseconds. If we come over here, we could say, okay, I want this to be set to seconds, and now I want to be able to nudge, even though my primary, it used to always be that the nudge was tied to the primary time display, but now I can nudge by 10 milliseconds if I wanted to. So we could decouple the primary time format from the nudge value just when we select a different timecode value, or if we say link to grid, that will follow the particular time value that you have there. So just try going into the nudge value, and let's say when you go to bars and beats, then you could set your nudge value here, and you could assign key commands for that as well. So let me know if that works for you. All right, so we see Jan from Cubase Index has received 1 gallon of coconut almond fudge ice cream. All right, so we have Nico joining us from Barcelona. Thanks for joining us today. And he just says, thanks, Greg, for your great support. So I'm happy to help people. Michael Teams just saying, great to see everybody on his Zoom on Tuesday. All right, Edge Byers is tuning in from Las Vegas. Says, hey, everybody, what's up? Greg, always a pleasure. So thanks for joining us. All right. So Animal just says, thanks for this. Could you recommend a workflow for this without touching the mouse? Maybe some combination for changing nudge values. All right. So let's say I think if we want to come over, let's say if we go to like our MIDI remote, and we'll just look under. So here we could choose like the next time format. So let's say I want this to be previous time format. And let's say next time format. And then we could say next grid type. We'll say previous grid type value for this remote. And then we could set the next grid type value with this button. So now when we go to look at the nudging, so if we come over here, let's activate the nudge on our project window. So when I come over here, we could say, okay, I want to just simply nudge right here so I can see my value. So when I hit this button, we go back to our previous values. So you can say, okay, I want this to be, and we could also just change our grid type. So we can say, okay, I want to be, so we could just kind of come right over here and change these particular values right there. So you could trigger those with different keyboard shortcuts, or from your MIDI remote if you have one configured for that. All right, Joel Plimmer asks, Greg, what's the advantage of having MIDI data that is within the range that you recorded it, visible and outside of the range of the grade out, and not editable? I'm used to DP where it's all together. So let's say, if we had a MIDI event here that lasted, so let's say, and as we come over here, we could enlarge the selected part to, so let's say if we have this, so we may still want to have that particular part, but let's say I resize the event and I want to copy and duplicate this, but I don't necessarily want, let's say that I'll just move this event slightly. Just turn on my snap here. All right, so if I wanted this particular event to be duplicated, so this isn't going to sound, and when I come over here and I duplicate, I could duplicate like a particular number of measures without these events kind of interfering within the duplicated range. But I could still have that. So let's say, okay, I need to duplicate that. And at the very end of this event, I need to include those. When I resize the event, then those will be included. But I don't necessarily, I could choose to have a smaller section of the event, and we could duplicate that and then just not affect kind of the rhythmic, pulse or snapping or the grid to that, so that way I could work with like the same event and have it chopped up and be able to duplicate and be able to expand the particular, all of the notes that are contained within the event whenever I need to, just by extending the right handle, the right bottom handle outward. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, so we see Randy from Radar the Band. Thanks for joining us. All right, great to see Vince on from Winnipeg. And Michael Teams has granted Randy 1 gallon of banana nut ice cream. All right, so we see from Sven, says I was recently asked by a friend how to program tempo changes in Cubase. I explained the tempo track to him. Doing so, I noticed that only changing the tempo by jump or ramp are available. Wasn't there an option to use curves? Think about non-linear accelerandos or retardandos, far more common than the linear ones. So, when we're doing a tempo track, so, currently the particular event here, so let's open up a tempo track. And when we have a tempo track, we could switch between different, so we could have a ramp. So if we have a ramp tempo, I could, just go directly between those particular points. And if we have this set to step, it will just immediately change at those particular points. So there isn't like a Boolean condition, but if we're in the tempo editor, you could record the tempo changes kind of as you see fit also. So let's say if I'm here, there is a, let's see if it's, see if it's in here. All right, so if you right click and activate tempo recording, so now if you wanted to, so if we have recorded something, so we could just simply record kind of these tempo changes, and we can see that this is more of kind of like a sinusoid curve here on our tempo ramp. Most of the time when we're dealing with tempo, we need to be at a particular tempo at, a particular moment in time is when that tempo is going to change. So if you wanted to manually record a tempo, you can kind of create, more of a, like a Boolean curve. You could do the tempo manually and just kind of record it right there. But, the vast majority of times, while it may look pretty, you're still getting from here, point A to point B and, at a different tempo. So, you could manually kind of draw in tempo changes. So if you said, okay, I want to come here, and most of the time when, let's say if we're in ramp, this may be a bit more cosmetic, but let's say, if we wanted to, do something like that, you could simply draw it in if needed. But I haven't heard any issues of actual kind of functional issues from from many film composers that kind of live and die in their tempo editor. So, it may not be as practical, sometimes, there could be an audible effect. But, you could do tap tempo as well, and then have that automatically interpolate into different tempo curves as you need. Okay. Okay. You see Animal One just says, Greg, thanks. Yes, this is what I was looking for. So that's great. Thanks for letting me know. All right. Edge Buyers asks, "Hi Greg, can you please demonstrate how to print an effect separately from the vocal, and can you print multiple effects at once?" So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so let's say I have my vocal here on this particular track.
Do you recall the day we first met? That was a long, long time ago.
All right, so we get to our sends. We're going to have a delay. I'll make it a little more obvious here.
In the school parking lot, waiting on our yellow coach to ferry us home. You looked my way and your heart shone through.
All right, so now if we, let's say, if we come over here, let's do File menu, Export Audio Mixdown, and we want to put, let's say, our verb and our stereo delay. I'm going to select multiple here. We're going to select our verb and stereo delay. I'm going to choose to create audio tracks. And let me set my left and right locators accordingly here. So just select the event, hit P, so it gives us our in and out points. When we come to our export audio mixdown, so again, select multiple. We'll select our 2 reverbs. We're going to create audio track. We'll export the audio. And now we could just have just the, so if we play, so the reverb is now printed.
Caught my breath while you called me to.
And the delay is printed separately.
Well, even now I'm so in love with you.
So come over to, again, export audio mixdown, set the left and right locators around the area, choose multiple. You could select the verb and stereo delay and create audio tracks, and then it will automatically print those effects for you. All right, always wonderful to see Val checking in from Vienna. He's been using Cubase for 15 years and counting. It's great to have you on. All right, Joel Plimmer just says thanks. All right, so we have a question. I was wondering if rendering/exporting makes a difference if I used a built-in ASIO driver or my Apollo UAD driver. Will it sound the same? I wouldn't. So if you have the audio, if you have it connected, so, you know, you could render the file without an audio interface present, I think. So, you know, the calculations are all going on internally, and the audio interface is going to be used just for monitoring purposes. So, I don't think you'll experience any quality of the actual rendered file. I haven't done a test on it, you know, and done a null test, but I think it would be the same. And you could think of the audio interface as just kind of playing the audio back. Okay. All right, from Tony Trunja is asking. All right, Greg, Tony Trunja's question is, Greg, is it possible to make a harp gliss sound using our Apache SX arpeggiator and save it as a MIDI file? Thanks. You could, but I would probably just, you know, most of the time if kind of doing like kind of a harp gliss type of sound. So let's say if I want to add let's add, I think we have harp sound in Iconica Sketch. All right, so when we want to come over here and we want kind of like a harp glissando. So I think I was helping out with Christoph Beck's assistant on this. So often, let's say if you wanted to do kind of like a harp gliss, we could just, let's come over and let's say our key is in, so let's come over here and I'll do just a quick scale correction. So I'll come over, I'll select in the MIDI editor, let's go to our scale assistant. All right, and say we want to be in E major. I'm going to come over to my quantize panel here. Let me just make this a little. All right, so I want to, let's say we want to put in like 16th notes, but I want my toplet. Often you have like kind of weird toplets with harp glissandos. So let's say, okay, I want to do like 13. Then I could come over here and let's just put it into like a step record. All right, let's make sure. Okay, so I'm going to now place this into step record, and then you could just and make sure I don't have auto quantize on. All right, let me just try. Okay. All right, so let me just come over here again. So say, okay, we want to start our glissando at measure 100. I'm going to put it, let's say, 64th notes. So now when we do kind of a glissando, we can just do a, let me just make sure. Yeah, let's do it in this region here where we have an event. So now you could just do, and let me just, So, just set the quantized value, and then, at that point, just kind of come over here. So let's say you do 60 fourth notes. So now as we kind of play this back, you can just, so like usually like step sequencing is kind of a great way of doing that. And if you need to do, like I know some people will do quarter notes, and again, just kind of change tuplets because it's not, so if you want to do like, septuplets or 11 tuplets, but, just try doing just a quick step entry. And then that's how I would probably, that's how I see a lot of people programming harp glisses. And, often when you hear kind of like harp music, a lot of times it's going to be almost like a 12-tone scale because you're doing that compositionally. It's often used where there's no kind of harmonic center. So it's just kind of like the first note and the last note, and anything in between. It's kind of that mystery of not having kind of like a harmonic foundation or root, but just kind of start on the note you want and end, and anything in between just kind of flourishes and has the embellishment that sounds natural for kind of a harp part. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, Joel Plimmer just says, is there a way to change tempo at a certain location by using a key command, like highlight region and hit key to speed it up? At that point, so let's say if we have a tempo track here. So let's say we have a lot of tempos, and I want to come over here. If I want to speed up a particular region, think if we just move this down one track here. So, all right, let me just adjust one preference here real quick. All right, so let's say if I select kind of a region here, we could speed up and slow down. So if I select the particular events with my object selection tool, we could speed up and slow down. So it's not necessarily a key command to do it on real time. I could also come over here and tilt the tempo from the start or the beginning. If I go to the center, I could compress the tempo. And if we want it, again, to just kind of come over here, and so we have a lot of different controls. If we're like right here and we say we want to insert a tempo, we can insert tempo at, so if we wanted to come over here, we could say key commands, and there's going to be like insert tempo at cursor, I think. Insert tempo event at cursor. So if we want to, program, let's say, okay, we're right here. So we could program from a MIDI remote or like a key signature or key command. So let's say, okay, I want this to insert the tempo. Event at the cursor, so I'm going to assign that to this particular button. So now when I'm here, I can move the cursor, say, okay, I want to insert the tempo, and then we can say, okay, I want it to be 90 beats a minute. I play along. I want my tempo here, and then we can say, okay, I want this to be 144, and we could just enter in tempos. So if you go again to the key command, you could, I don't think there's a default assignment to it, but if you go to your key commands here, there is an insert tempo event at cursor. If you wanted to easily kind of, proportionally raise or lower tempos. If they're selected here, we could just select and go into our upper center area, and that would allow us to increase or decrease tempos proportionally, or we could kind of expand it or compress it. So if we say, okay, this is, I want more change or less change overall, we could just go to the center area. And we could also tilt just by going to the upper left or right hand corners like that. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Joel. All right, Radar to the Band's asking, any news on 15 yet? So nothing that's been announced. So as soon as it's announced, and as soon as it's released, we will probably do kind of our tradition is to do kind of a very detailed walkthrough the live stream after the release of the event, of the new title. So when it's out, but nothing has been announced. And usually with Cubase, Steinberg doesn't announce it before it's released and shipping. So, all right, wonderful to see Best Korean Jesus. Just saying we in here. Great to see you on. He's usually a very good lurker. So hope you're well and doing well in San Diego. All right, DJ Ride asks, how do you use the MIDI beat designer with a new drum machine to use the correct sounds and some patterns the kick will be playing hi-hat, etc.? So, all right, so let's come over, we'll make a new project. All right, so I'm going to add a drum machine. So you may not see the particular, drum map names be carried over, but let's add a drum track. I'm going to tell this drum track to do a MIDI part. All right, so I'm going to open up quick drum sounds here. All right, so when we come over, let's go to our MIDI inserts, and we'll go to Beat Designer. All right, so when you click here, you could actually kind of see the MIDI note assignments. So let's say, and you could also just click right on the particular sounds to hear it. So now if we wanted to come over here, and we say, okay, let's say if I want this to be a hi-hat here, I could just kind of click and see, okay, my hi-hat, because these don't have like drum map names, they will automatically be carried over into the pattern editor. But if you wanted to come over here, let's try F#1 and see if that's a hi-hat. So the names probably aren't going to carry over. I think that the drum machine, the intention is kind of when we add in So at this point, we could trigger that, but the names aren't going to necessarily line up. But if I, let's say, make a particular, but if we wanted to have kind of a similar experience when we add a drum track and we choose for it to go to a pattern event, So the beat designer, I would probably use, I would tend to use the pattern editor. I don't think that there's much in the MIDI beat designer that's not in the pattern editor, but there's stuff in the pattern editor that's not in the beat designer. So when we go to open up, let's say we'll load a kit here, and we click on the editor. Since we chose it as a pattern editor here, we could see all of the particular names laid out for us automatically. So I think that this would be kind of a better tool, accompanied with the particular, with the drum machine. I think that this would probably make more sense with the drum machine. But I don't think the Beat Designer plugin is kind of used for like drum maps. If you made a drum map, from the drum machine, you could load that drum map up on a particular channel. But I think you're better off probably using the pattern editor. So if you haven't dived into it, let me know and I could show you some tricks. But I think after working with the pattern editor, you'd see that it's more powerful and has the ease of simplicity of the Beat Designer plugin, but more powerful and more flexible. All right, Tarek just says, is there a way to make a randomized LFO from the new modulators to modulate FX's parameters? So you might be able to, let's come over. Let me just open up a quick project here. Okay, so let's come over here to, let's say, modulators. Okay, let me just start fresh with this. Okay, so let's say we want to, all right, and we currently have this modulator on, let's say we wanted to do cut off. All right, and then I think if you get to the mod scripter, there might be some presets in here for more random, apply randomness. So let's say if I want to stop this one and now I will come over here. Let's learn this. So now we could have randomness. So if you get to the mod scripter and just come over here and look for presets, then so as soon as you kind of see this little drop down menu, go to load preset, and then there's apply randomness as one of the mod scripter presets. And if you want that to so try that. Try using the mod scripter for that. Okay. All right, Joel Plimmer just says, also harp glisses sound great just by glissing up unquantized on black keys and then tune it to the key of the song, as long as it's major. All right. And that's Joel's quick method. All right, DJ Ride just asked, how do you use the chord pad guitar patterns? Okay, so let's say we have a nylon guitar. And I may have our, so let's say I have nylon guitar part. All right, so let's come over here to our chord pads. All right, so instead of playing plain chords, I want to do a pattern, and we could come over and just kind of choose different patterns if we wanted to. So let's come over to like a factory preset. So here's the default guitar one. So now when I trigger a chord pattern, and there's going to be different factory presets if you want to come over here. And now if I wanted to record that directly in, I could just hit record. So now when I just come over here, and now it's as if I had played all those beautiful arpeggios directly in. So you could record the arpeggio right into, so once you have the chord pads, you can choose between kind of plain chords or patterns. You'll have different presets that you could use here as well. So play around with those. And you could also take any pattern that you have in a particular event. So let's say if I like this particular pattern, I could drag and drop a MIDI event directly into so, and then you could record those arpeggios in real time back into Cubase. All right, so we see Tony Trunzo just says, thanks, Craig, so you're welcome. All right. All right, T. Jonathan L. says, does Cubase have sales like the one that just passed often? I feel so bad I didn't take it. So it's usually maybe twice a year. So it's usually kind of towards the end of March-ish. In years past, there's been one kind of March-ish and September-ish, but it's not always the same exact day. So it used to be interesting. We used to do kind of promotions, and then other companies would do announcements during our promotions because it was pretty consistent. or when we have consistent time frames for product releases, our companies would release a public beta of something like 6 months in advance, but announce it the same week that we were doing, to try to deflect some momentum that they were losing. All right, so Joel Plimmer just says very helpful with tempos. Thanks, Greg. So you're welcome. All right, Tarek MG asks, can I have the same MIDI keyboard control parameter in a virtual instrument, let's say a synth using Learn CC, and also make it control an insert effect, like let's say an EQ, or do I need two devices? So, one of the beautiful aspects of the MIDI remote is I could come over here. So I'm going to do, let's say, I want to take, I have like a Chord Nano control here. And what I want to do is to just come over and assign different parameters. So let's say I want to, in this case, I want to control a parameter in a virtual instrument. So I'm going to open up the virtual instrument here. All right, so I want to right click and I'll just do a different instrument just to show this. Okay, so I want to go to this instrument. So we could right click and we'll see MIDI remote pick up for mapping. So I'm going to pick up that parameter. I move the knob and then I click apply mapping. All right, so now this knob is controlling this parameter. But let's say I want to go to a completely different track. And let's say, okay, I have an EQ parameter on frequency. So I want to be able to, we're going to turn this on, and let's say I have my gain and I want to adjust my frequency here. So I'm going to right click and we'll say MIDI remote pickup for mapping. I move the second knob and apply the mapping. So same controller. So I'll move this over. So we'll see knob 1 of the controller is controlling that synth parameter. Knob 2 on a different channel, different program, could be controlling that on a different track. That could be controlling the EQ frequency. So, just for any parameter, once you have the MIDI remote set up, they're all kind of actively waiting for you to assign it, but they could be assigned to any particular function that you want. So again, just right click on the parameter, MIDI remote, pick up for mapping, and then move whatever, so if I wanted to control the channel volume for this channel, again, right click, pick up for MIDI remote, and then I move this knob, hit apply mapping, and then I could just come right over here and just have everything assigned that easily. All right, wonderful to see Sable Winters in from Bay Area. Sorry we missed you on the Zoom social meetup on Tuesday. All right, Jesus Lamelli says, is there a way to record the test generator sounds? So let's say we want to, I'll just add an audio track here. Okay, and I'm going to set this to my stereo in. All right, I go to my mix console. on my input channel here. So I'm going to make sure if you don't see your input channels, they may be filtered out. So I'm going to turn down my, let's say we want to record. So on my input channel here, so we'll just call this track test tone. All right, so my input channel, I want to put an insert. So we'll go to our tools to test generator. All right, so let's say we want to make it, we'll just do like some white noise. So I'm going to take that white noise, we'll activate this particular track. And then all I had to do is hit record. And if I want to switch to, say, I'm more of a pink noise or brown noise. So now, so I could take off that plugin from my input channel, and now we listen to my lovely 21st century composition, and it's just recorded directly as audio. Give me switching to noise types. So just put it on the input channels, put the plugin, and then you could record it as audio directly in. All right, so we have Soren saying hello. Thanks for joining us. See, 5E is back. Great to see you back. I think you got some chips. All right, so we have Listen CS just saying hey. So thanks for being online with us today. All right, Sable has been granted 1 gallon of chocolate eclair ice cream. I thought she was a Neapolitan fan from memory. All right. James Daly asks, why is it one project I've been working on, when I open it, only one track out of the 10 tracks I record has the record monitor enabled, and the rest of the tracks are disabled? So let's say if you open up a project, let me just go to a project here. All right, I'll just record enable all the tracks here. Okay, so I'm gonna save this. Okay, I'm gonna close the project. Let's come here to our recent projects. I mean, I could see kind of a logic of not saving the record enable states, because a lot of times if that was saved and you go to hit play, then it, like those particular tracks won't play back. So I could see where maybe that's not, I could see the logic of not having that status saved with the project. But let me know if there's a particular reason that you need to record enabled saved with the project. Usually once you have, and there's obviously like different tricks where you can say, okay, I want to automatically record on selected tracks. So, there's a a preference that may also check if you go to your preferences under editing. I think it's under project and mix consoles to see if you toggle this enable record on selected tracks, if toggling that makes a difference. But let me know if there's a particular workflow reason that you need your audio tracks automatically, or your tracks automatically record enabled to be recalled. All right, so Tarek MG just says spectacular. Thanks, mate. So you're welcome. All right, so we have great to see Yazian on from the Netherlands. All right, Famo says, question here. I've noticed that each time I'm in a MediaBay browser and sampling sounds, it doesn't play out, and I can't audition the sounds until I drag it into a track in the project. So generally this will be, so if you're in Cubase Pro, go to your audio connections. So a lot of times, you'd want to activate the control room. So let's say if I go into my MediaBay and I come over to like some different loops here, we may notice that this doesn't automatically play. So because right now those tracks aren't assigned, I think the concept is those tracks aren't assigned anywhere. So if you go to your audio connections, go to your control room tab, activate it. You want to make sure that one of your monitors is enabled. Then when you click, this is kind of routed through the control room. So once you're in, what you want to do is just come over to your audio connections, control room. You probably want to have your stereo out, but choose for it not to be connected. Seems counterintuitive at first. And then when you right click here, you want to just say, okay, you want to add a monitor, like I have my HS7s, and this is where all the monitoring path is. So try activating the control room. All right, Soren has received 1 gallon of coconut almond ice cream from Michael Teams. All right, great to see Jay from Secret Studios on. We hope you had a wonderful birthday on Tuesday. All right, and Femo just saying hi from Jersey. So let me know what part of New Jersey you're in. I lived in Nutley for a little bit after college when I worked at studios in New York City. All right, Jay has received 1 gallon of banana nut bread ice cream. It sounds like a good way to cap off your birthday week celebration. Okay, reading through comments here. All right, so we have Jay for Secret Studios says, just wanted to reach out to do a feature request for Steinberg to port headphone match over to Cubase. It is frustrating to lose this feature when I'm in Cubase. I'll pass it along, but if you have Nuendo, I think it's, if there's a reason you're running Nuendo as opposed to Cubase, I think you have a Nuendo license, if I'm not mistaken. I would just run it in Nuendo if you need that. All right, so we see Sable says, sorry, she had a scheduling conflict last Tuesday. She missed seeing everyone too. So hopefully for October, we'll see you, but we hope you're doing well. All right, Drowsy Eternal just says, Meat Canyon should do a Cubase episode. Audi and Lee's saying hi to everyone from Austria. All right, we see Da Vinci Girl on. We see Tim Weinheimer from Mission Viejo, California. Michael Teams wants everyone to whack the like button We have Steve Leeds sending greetings from Berkeley, California. Great to see you on the Zoom social. So we see from Jesus Lamelli, is there a way to have more than 360 beats per minute tempo? So I think it maxes out at that, but if you're doing MIDI work, I mean, you could always, if you're at the 360 beats per minute, you know, you could do logical editor presets to automatically, you know, double or quadruple or, you know, octuple the time if you need to. But I haven't really, you know, if you're recording audio, it doesn't have to follow the tempo. But, you know, let's say if we had, I'll just do a new project here. Okay, so let's say let's put our tempo to 360. All right, so say we want to put a kick. All right, so let's say we play this back at 360 beats a minute. All right, so if I wanted that to be perceptually, like for the MIDI to be twice as fast, you know, we could come over here. All right, so that's going to be like every. So I'm going to go to my logical editor, and you could always time stretch audio if you need to be faster than that. But let's say I want to take my notes and I want to adjust the length. Let's multiply by 2, and let's adjust the position. So let's say, you know, we have, and we're going to multiply by 2 for our position as well. Okay, so we see, we'll get a sense of the tempo here. So that's at 360 beats a minute. That's one note every. So now if I come over here, let me just divide by 2, sorry. So now we did that. So in essence, we've taken our MIDI from 360 to 720 to 1440. So we could kind of time compress the MIDI or adjust all the MIDI and do time stretching on samples if you need to go beyond 360 beats a minute. So. All right, Nevo says maybe you can help in Cubase MIDI remote and CC. I can't understand how to set up my 4 faders. Control CC 1 through 4 to CC 11 or 64. So, when you're using the MIDI remote, if you wanted your device just to transmit MIDI CCs, don't use the MIDI remote. Because the MIDI remote is going to take that CC and transform that MIDI CC, kind of like, words in a language. It's going to transfer that MIDI CC message directly into some other function. But if you want it to, so even though this may be transmitting MIDI CC1, once it's kind of configured as a MIDI remote, that MIDI CC1 message is just telling it to move this fader, and this fader in the MIDI remote is assigned to a function in the program or a plugin. So if we want it to just capture, let me get one other MIDI remote connected here quickly. So let's say if let me not be turned on. Yeah, don't have it connected. So if you wanted to transmit CC messages, the MIDI remote is not what you want to use. Now, generally, most MIDI fader boxes, just about all of them, will allow you to assign which MIDI CC message is being transmitted. So if I wanted to go to, let's say and I think I have it installed on here. No, I don't think I have it installed, but so the MIDI, so often you may get like the Chord Nano control. I don't have it installed on this computer. I can assign MIDI CCs from a software controller. So if you wanted to write, MIDI CC1, CC11, CC7, don't route that controller through the MIDI remote. So you could, when you're building the MIDI remote, just don't assign those particular CCs, within your MIDI remote profile. You could just don't touch those, and the ones that you want to work with the MIDI remote. Now, if you have a scenario where, you can't assign what MIDI CCs are being transmitted on a particular MIDI remote, and you're fixed at like 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you want fader 1 to do, CC1, fader 2 to do CC11, then we could go into what's called a logical or the input transformer. So if we come over here, we could do this globally or put it onto the track. And here we could say, okay, we're going to do a preset. We're going to say we're going to transform MIDI CC. So we're going to say type is equal to a controller, and we could say that we'd say subtype. So let's say we want controller fader 2, which is transmitting MIDI CC2 to transmit MIDI CC7 or MIDI CC11. So here I'm going to choose my subtype. So we're going to say our MIDI controller. So we want to take MIDI controller 2 breath control, and what we want to do with that breath control is we're going to take the subtype and we're going to add 9. And why do we add 9? Because we're going from CC2 to CC11. So now as I move my fader that's transmitting MIDI CC2, it's now going to transmit MIDI CC1. So you could set up different scenarios for different MIDI CCs. If you need to remap it, it's often best to remap it at the source. It's just much easier to remap it at the source. But again, if you want your MIDI fader box to do just MIDI CCs, don't connect those faders or that device through the MIDI remote, because the MIDI remote is going to take those MIDI CCs and transform them to control other functions, where the MIDI CC is kind of the language and the, the dialogue language to make that, take that device, transmit it into something, have it get translated into control of your functions. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Nevos. Great. All right, Peaks asks, hey Greg, can you automatically with logical editor command have all the articulations of one MIDI track spread into each MIDI track for each articulation so that all sustain art goes to a sustain, all sustain articulations goes to a sustain track, etc. So do you want, all right, just make sure I'm understanding. So let's say if we have like an instrument type here. So let's say we do all right, so say we have a clarinet. All right, so let's say I want this to be all right, so let's say we'll do sustain here. Okay. All right, so let's say we have this, and I'm going to come over here. Let's go to our expression map, and I'm going to import the key switches. All right, so now we can come over to our articulation and dynamics. Let's say if we have a couple of articulation lanes, let's say, okay, we want to start with sustain. Then maybe we'll go to staccato on the short notes, back to sustain. So let's just come over here. All right, so let's say we have okay, so it says have all the articulations of one MIDI track spread into each MIDI track for each articulation. So let's see if we can do that. I'm not sure, why. Maybe if you could let me know why you want them each on. Let me see. Okay, so spread. So let's come over here. Let's get to logical editor. So I'm not sure if you want to have all the articulations on different tracks or. So I'm trying to figure out if I think what you want peaks is maybe do you want to like have like sustained notes and maybe staccato notes to be on separate lanes? And then to be able to split those, maybe if you could verify that. So I'm not seeing a way in the logical editor, but I could take around, but I just want to make sure before I go down a rabbit hole that I'm understanding the question. So here when we look, we have our articulations, like if we want to be able to isolate like the short notes from the long notes. So, and if so, if you tell me, so most people kind of, use the expression maps so that everything can be in one place so they don't have to be kind of spread out onto different tracks. But let me know if you kind of, instead of this, you want those all to be spread, like to be split to different tracks. If you could let me know that would be probably able to help you with that. Michael Teams says he had a question, even wrote it down. Now he can't find the note. So maybe you put it in your phone or write it down on your computer. All right, so we have Rick France checking in from Pacific Northwest. Thanks for joining us. All right, Sable Winters has been making theme songs for YouTube channels, including intro, outros, and bumpers. It's kind of fun. It sounds like a fun project to do. All right, so we have Cornell Hegedus sending greetings from the Netherlands. All right, Michael Teams just says, please go through how to stack MIDI instruments in Halion 7. I'm pretty fuzzy on that. Okay, so let's open up Halion 7 and be similar if we're doing in Halion Sonic. All right, so let's say we want to make kind of a monster synth sax. So I'm going to say let's do a multi-instrument. So let's come over. All right, so I want to come over here to like an etude. So I want to do piano. All right, so select this. All right, and now we want to layer up some other instruments. So let's do kind of a classic FM keyboard. So let's say classic tines. I'm going to drag this over. Okay, so now. And let's throw in a string patch. So we'll just say viola. And let's do kind of a synth patch. All right, so when I come over here to MIDI, all right, so now when I play this, everything, I'm only going to hear the piano because this is, my channel is set to channel 1, my MIDI channel. So if I want to layer in these devices, I could just come over here and say I want this. And let's layer in a viola. So I'm going to change the MIDI channel here from channel 3 to channel 1. And I will just, let's get to the macro editor. We'll put this on like legato patch. And I want to, again, select the MIDI tab. Let's do our synthesizer, and we'll put this all onto channel 1. And then if I want maybe this just to be, let's see if we could switch this to be monophonic. If we want, you know, we could just kind of come over here. Let's get to the synth area. Put this on monophonic, so now when I play. And then if I want to adjust the levels, you know, we could just come over here. So, and then if you want to also in the MIDI say, okay, I want the, you know, when we come over here, we could also choose, you know, polyphony. But if I wanted the Rhodes to, like the FM piano to be an octave higher, we could just transpose. So just make sure that all of these are set to the same channel. While we see A 1 through 16, B 1 through 16, C 1 through 16, it's because we have 64 MIDI channels within a single instance of Halion. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Michael. All right, sorry, my chat field just jumped. All right. And Jazz Dude's pointing out there are already double and halftime presets in a MIDI logical editor. All right, so we see Joel says, like, how can we paste and replace or paste and merge data at the current target location? So we said, how do you paste and merge? So let's give it a shot here. So let's say if I come over here. All right, so say I have a long note here, and I want to copy this data, so I'm going to copy. Let's go to this particular track, and I will paste, and we can see that we can choose right there. So just pasting kind of within the editor. So if we wanted to do it like on top of a particular part, so let's say I wanted to take, let's undo that. So we see we have one long note here. So if I want to copy this data over top, so right now there's two events we'll play, and if we grab our glue tool, we could just come right over here and glue those events together. So now it's one event. So it was basically two events that were kind of layered together like so. But if we grab the glue gun and hold down the Alt or Option key, at that point we've now merged those particular events. If we want to activate delete overlaps, so we see we have this one long note here, and if I wanted to take just a portion of this particular event here, there is an editing preference. So if you go to your preferences or settings, if you go to editing to delete overlaps, we can now just kind of drag that over, and then that long note will be gone. So that way we've effectively kind of copied that data in and replaced the data once we have the delete overlaps. And there is, if you go to MIDI functions, you could choose to delete overlaps here as well. So if you want to delete overlaps, you could just simply enable that, and that would get rid of the underlying note. So once you have that there, you just go to MIDI functions and delete overlaps, and the long note part is disappeared. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Okay, so we see from Nevos as well. Thank you, that's very helpful. Try ASAP. So Soren says, Greg, how about talking about something very little Cubase related? I just went through a collaboration effort, and my partner was difficult to deal with. He demanded 100% power, and I felt like it's going to be continued. Let me see if it's continued later here. All right, so I don't see it continued. It says it just went through a collaboration effort, and my partner was difficult to deal with. He demanded 100% power, and I felt like, I don't see the rest. Yeah, I mean, I think, why we have probably, I think the greatest catalyst for buying home recording gear was going to a recording studio when you're younger and having a bad experience where you felt like you didn't get enough money. And I think that as we, perhaps hone our craft, we also have to hone kind of our skill set on, relationships and dealing with people. I often feel like I played in so many bands, I should have an honorary PhD in psychology. Just how to read different musicians. Like, okay, this guitar player, you could insult their family 100 times and have less offense than say, hey, can you turn the high end down in your guitar? So you just kind of learn how to read people. I would say that if someone's going to be bossy and not collaborative, I would probably choose, not to work with them unless you're going to get something financially out of it. If it's just kind of like a writing type of, or, bouncing production ideas together, maybe choose not to work with that person and think of it as an educational experience of this is the scenario I don't want to see myself in, versus, and sometimes you'll be just stuck working with clients that maybe, or collaborating with people that you don't, that you can't get along with, that you don't have the same like vision for the project, and that's fine. And then sometimes you're like, okay, this is why, this project is going to end. We're going to do this song and that's it. And I'll put up with it for a song or put up with it an album, and I'll choose not to collaborate or work with this person in the future. So, but let me know if there's more details. Soren. Flyv just says, I love these live streams. That's helpful. Glad it's helpful for people. All right, Randy's happy that's Friday. All right, Charles Davis says a question. How is it possible to change a MIDI note's articulation in the middle of a note when using an expression map, or can you only change the articulation at the beginning of the MIDI note? So usually with MIDI, it's going to be kind of the beginning, but let's go ahead and give it a test here. Okay, so I think... All right, so let's say if we are playing... All right, so generally I think it's going to be at the beginning of the note, but some, depending on the library. So let's say if I come over here and I record in... All right, so, I don't know of, like, when we're working with articulations, where a note becomes, staccato, then legato in, like, in actual kind of musical scenario. But, we can do, so let's say this is our normal staccato. So we're going to start off, let's say, marcato on the clarinet, and let's say I want to switch this to kind of emulate the sustain that we would get, and I want this to be for the short notes. And let's say going into the long note here, we'll go back to sustain. So sometimes when we're on particular articulations, like my sustain, like let's say if we're, a string instrument, a brass, or, or a woodwind, if you wanted to do a crescendo, we could use the modulation wheel to do that. So that way we could have kind of realistic dynamics. So that's not changing the articulation, but that patch, when we switch to the sustain, will automatically, just play back. So let's say now I have that long note, and I want to, we'll add an articulation, we'll add our modulation here, and this could be modulation or expression. But when we go to the long note, I want to have this modulation, and let me just turn snap off. So I'm just going to kind of draw in and do kind of a crescendo, and then a decrescendo on that particular long note. So it's while it's so, and let's say when we go to this long note, I want it to the dynamics to be higher. So it's kind of coupled with MIDI CCs. So most of the articulation, so some articulations can change all of these ones, and you know, in this case, like usually the sustain will allow you to kind of have different levels of dynamic control with the addition of a particular MIDI CC. Sometimes you may switch between different MIDI CCs, but you know, I don't know of a note that's going to be marcato, you know, or you know, a note that changes from staccato to legato or legato to staccato. Generally, I don't think that happens, but if you want it to change particular sounds, then at that point, you know, at that point you could just, you know, if the instrument supports that, you can kind of change the dynamics of it with additional MIDI CC messages. And different instruments, you know, East-West will do something differently than, you know, than orchestra tools, which will do something different than Steinberg, and something different than using Spitfire. So there could be different techniques for doing that. So hope that's helpful. Okay, so Peak says, we have further clarification. Thank you for that. It says, yes, I want the articulations on separate tracks because of track delay. So I have a key switch patch to sketch out all my ideas and then put the articulations on separate track that has a track delay. So let me know if you come over here. So let's say I want to take, like, you know, these. Let's see if we could select notes with particular articulations. Let's see if we could do that. I understand your workflow on it now. Let's see. See if there's any factory presets for this. Yes, I don't see. Let me see if I could. Right. So it's not going to be length. I think what we want to do is select notes that are assigned. Let's see if it's maybe under a VST3 event. I'm not sure if it is. Just take a look in the project logical editor, see if there's anything there. I don't think there's anything in. Yes, I don't see a way of doing it, but I'll kind of play around with it and see if I could have over the weekend, see if I could have a better answer on Tuesday. So I understand what you want to do now, but all right. All right, wonderful to see Brian Sawyer from Yuma, Arizona, where he says it's the sunniest place on earth. Okay, reading through. You see John Koskin is thanking Michael Teens for asking his question on layering. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped, trying to find my spot. All right, so we see from George Conte, says, question, now that Yamaha has discontinued the Nuage series of control surfaces, do you think they would ever make a more affordable line to compete with the Avid S1, S1 and SSL UF8? I haven't seen anything kind of on the roadmap with those. I know I asked for it many times, and many people at Steinberg have as well. So, but we'll see what Yamaha is working on. So, I mean, you can use a DM3 or a DM7, which is probably a bit overkill for, their digital mixers that also have some control surface capabilities, but I wouldn't equate it to a dedicated controller. So I think Yamaha may be more geared at selling digital mixers currently. See, Cornell is just saying musicians can be sassy. So. And Michael Team says sometimes writing with people can be like pulling teeth. I think even John Lennon and Paul McCartney, as successful as they were, didn't really reunite. John's Odyssey says, what's one underrated Cubase feature you think more producers should take advantage of? I don't think of Cubase from my personal perspective. I I think one theme that a lot of producers should consider is maybe using more of the stock tools. Like I would, I would use like the built-in plugins more than a lot of people are doing. I think that a lot of times kind of the built-in plugins get casually dismissed because, you didn't spend extra money on them. But I think that there's a lot of very, incredibly high quality plugins that are included. I see a lot of people, purchasing third-party tools for pitch correction that I don't think is necessary. I see a lot of people purchasing third-party tools for, listening to loops. Not necessary to me. I see a lot of people purchasing expensive third-party solutions for, aligning audio. And I think that once you start working with these third-party solutions, that you get into this, we'll call it version-itis, where, your main tool could be updated to work with the latest operating system, but that third-party accessory may not be ready yet. We went through a lot of teething pains trying to get like a lot of technology, third-party technology that people had gotten used to with their functions, like when Apple Silicon came out, and we had this, huge potential performance increases, and a lot of companies didn't want to, update their technology earlier. So some people were kind of in this weird transition. So I think, the one feature I would say is kind of using more of the built-in included tools and really explore those. I see a lot of people when we show a plugin on a live stream, may go, oh, I didn't know that was there. Why did I just spend $50 on this particular plugin if Cubase has a version that does it and sounds better? So I would, always encourage people to explore kind of the built-in instruments. I mean, Retrolog is fantastic if you want all sorts of amazing kind of rompler type sounds, and other synthesizers, the Halion Sonic Pad Shop. You could spend a lifetime kind of getting sounds designed in Pad Shop. And with Groove Agent, instead of having like one drum plugin, it's like a virtual session drummer, and one that's kind of like an MPC paradigm, that you could have those kind of integrated into a single tool. So I would say that people should use the tools that they already have, and I think they'd be pleasantly surprised without having to use a lot of third-party tools. But maybe other people could share what their what they think underrated features are. And we see Jazz Dude saying MIDI inserts and MIDI. See, Sable Winters just mentioning that Spotify is stealing her identity. They created AI music in my name and attached those to my account profile. Not cool. So, Radar of the Band says this stream is very relaxing. All right, so we see from Quellen says, hello, is it possible to unmute parts of an audio track by only selecting the part with the range tool without pressing first Shift X to cut the part out? It would be great, like in Pro Tools. Okay. Okay, so let me just import a quick audio file so we can test this. I think we could do it probably in a macro pretty easily if you want. All right, so let me just... Sorry about the volume there. Let me just turn that down. Okay, so let's say if we had, so I'm not sure if you want to, so here I'm just selecting with the range tool and muting. All right, so we can mute that way. All right, but you want to unmute. We just, all right, so, all right, is this possible to unmute parts of an audio track only? All right, so let's say if we have our, so if I'm here, so let's say I want to mute, I hit Shift M and Shift U to unmute. So let's say if I'm here, Shift M. So if my cursor's right there, just hit Shift U and Shift M to mute and unmute. So we don't have to necessarily split first. So let's say if we undo, so if I'm here, I could just hit Shift M, so I'm not splitting. And then, so let's say if I'm over here, let's say if we hit, if we're at the beginning of the event. So, and again, I could just come right over here and Shift U to unmute just a portion with the range tool. So, but I don't have to split it at first. So if I just come right over here, select a range, Shift M, it's not cut. And then if so let's say if I'm here and I could just hit Shift U to unmute the event. So let's see what happens if I have multiple regions selected here. So let's say I move my cursor here and I hit Shift. We could, I think, just hit, sorry, wrong keyboard shortcut. So without doing anything, so Shift U. And I can navigate using the left, right arrow keys. So I can say Shift M, Shift M, Shift M. So let's say I want to unmute this, Shift U, Shift U. So no splitting. So try those keyboard shortcuts, Quellen, and let me know if they work. All right, wonderful to see Graham Witcher on from Oxford, England. Okay, just reading through comments here. All right, wonderful, always wonderful to see Tiago checking in from Brazil. Thanks for joining today. I was thinking of you yesterday. I was helping my son learn the geography of South America for his Spanish class. Of course, Brazil is there. All right, so Soren just says, just referencing a YouTube music attorney about identity theft of AI companies. Disable. All right, so we see Graham Witcher giving kudos to Jazz Dude for his unwavering excellence in what you do for us here on the fantastic live stream. So I'll second and third and fourth and quintuple that. Averse Solo says, hi, is it possible to assign a keyboard shortcut to an offline process like normalization? So yeah, so I'm just going to come in here. So if we come over, and you would find it under, I think it's process audio. So let's take a look. Come over here to the key commands. So under process, so you can say normalize. So let's say I want to call it, let me just assign a particular keyboard shortcut. Hope it's not taken. All right. So now when I want to normalize the audio, I could just and apply that normalization right there. So again, you can go to edit to key commands, and then you'll see under processing, and then you could assign key commands there or MIDI remotes. See, Jazzy mentioning, he says he watched a live concert of Infected Mushroom right before the stream started. Those guys do Psytrance and Cubase for many years. So yeah, we did got to help out with the video, like a Steinberg Spotlights interview with them. So those guys are a lot of fun. Very particular on what colors their kick drums are. Very strong feelings on that. All right, so let me jump to a couple of questions that were mailed in. We had a number of different questions. All right, I'm going to open up project. So the first question is how to stop scrolling in the key editor while opening the editor. Okay. So sometimes you may open up a key editor on a particular event to do an edit, and then the event has kind of flown by you. So it's kind of just gone to time. The screen has redrawn. So let's say if we're editing a particular event here, and I want to edit, and we open this up, and let's say our key editor. So I open up now, and then the key editor redrew, but what I want was actually kind of in the back here. All right, so there is a function that you could suspend auto scroll while editing. So if we do like an edit here, that now that I'm doing edits, so we'll see this little auto scroll function. And this auto scroll function has a couple of cool things. One is that as we're going, so if I'm not editing, it will continue on in sync. Now we could also have a stationary cursor. And if we didn't want this to be kind of in sync, so I could have the bottom zone kind of scroll. continuously and have a stationary cursor here, or if I want these to be in sync with each other, they'll both. So I could have both of them in a page cursor position or just both in page scroll. But again, while I'm editing, so if I moved a note here, this won't redraw so that I can make this edit. And then I could just hit the F key to immediately jump right back to where I was. So if you do an edit, you can just simply come right over here and make sure that the suspend auto scroll when editing is checked. So a couple of things you could do. And again, you could synchronize the view or have a stationary cursor in the bottom, but not in the top, or vice versa. So as soon as you kind of select a note here, then the scrolling will stop so that you could continue to do that edit. And then if you hit F or just click on this button, you'll go right back kind of in sync. Okay, next question we had. Okay, it says, hi Greg, I have a question about dynamic range meter, like metric AB plugin. Is there any way to have measurement in Cubase? I can't find it in Supervision or other Cubase meters. Many thanks in advance for your help. All right, so if you wanted to kind of listen to the dynamic range of an event, so let's say we have, listen to like this song here. Okay, so we're going to open up Supervision. And a lot of times when you go to Supervision, your first thing may be just like an overall level. But we're going to switch this to our loud under measurement. We can see kind of our loudness. All right, and what we see here is the range. So we could see, and this may be depending on how you have it set, you may see it just as R, but this is kind of the range of the dynamics. And then we also have a, what they call, I think it's peaked PLR, you may see it indicated as. And this is your peak to loudness ratio. So this is kind of your overall loudness to the peak, the difference there. So that could give you your basic dynamic range. If you wanted to visualize it in another way, I'll add, let's say, another meter here. And I'll just extend this over to the right. And on this meter, instead of level, I'm going to choose under measurement again. I think we choose loudness curve. All right, now for each of the meters, when we kind of look at it, we have this little settings. So if I just wanted to see the kind of the dynamic range, we can now just come over here and we'll see. And I could also just kind of choose to hide. So here we could see kind of our dynamic range graphically, this line. See as we get a little louder. So this is kind of a horizontal view. I know some of them could be more vertical, but it's really just a way of kind of showing the same information. So as we get louder here, we could see. And we could bring in those other elements as well. So if you want to see your momentary, short-term, or integrated loudness, but kind of the background line there, that's going to be your dynamic range, as also indicated here. So this is your, again, your PLR. And I think if we wanted to add yet another one, we could come over here and set this to your loudness histogram. And if we want to go into your settings here, we could say we want to go to PLR. Then that will give you kind of a visual indication. So we have kind of 3 different ways within the measurement icons to see that. And again, you could kind of isolate. So if you select this, just kind of pop over here, and now you could only see the particular dynamic range. So give those 3 meters, again, the loudness curve, or if you want to be the overall loudness or the loudness histogram, you could see some of the different options available for you there. All right. All right, so we see a question from Doughboy. It says, hey, Greg, just had a quick question. Is there a way to add more keys to the virtual keyboard? I know it lets you play 13 keys. I was wondering if there was a way to edit it, etc. Okay, so let's come over here. Let's take a look. All right, so let's say we have our MIDI track. Okay, so I'm going to hit Alt or Option plus K. And let me just... All right, so I think we could play kind of like, we have kind of, if you're playing it from the keys themselves, we can come over here. And so here we're going to have like 3 octaves. Let's see if we increase the horizontal size of it. All right, so we have 3 octaves. It's visible there. And when we click here, I think we have kind of 1 octave. But let's see if we, so we'll have our velocity control there. And then we could switch octaves. So if I'm just, but I think as we're playing it, it's only going to be set up and designed for kind of 1 octave. Because kind of, I don't think that there's a way to get another octave. I mean, obviously we want it to kind of mimic the layout of a piano keyboard, and we can't necessarily get a second. The typical computer QWERTY keyboard doesn't support more than 2 octaves of space, but if you wanted to just, or 2 octaves simultaneously, but you can. So, but if you want to just adjust your octave here, so you can play more notes that way. All right, so you see Sable Winters just says, Greg, did you see my email about on a continuous controller script? Yeah, I did. So I was just curious. I think I sent an email or maybe asked in the following live stream if that was the script that you downloaded, and where I kind of had the same kind of functionality. So I was curious if that was like a script that you downloaded from Akai, or was it a user script? So I'm not sure if you are able to tell me or share a download link of perhaps where you got that script. And if so, I'd be happy to kind of take a look at it. But I had similar issues opening it, what it seemed like that you did as well, similar. So. All right, so we see Radar of the Band is back. Okay, so we see from Soren, says, Greg, a problem I have and hopeless with it. It's about the crest factor, the difference between the waveform tops and the body of the waveform. When too large, then difficulties in mastering continue. Please help me. So like when we see kind of like, that's kind of what that PLR is kind of showing, where, if we look at this, we could see like maybe we're having, I'll just increase the amplitude here. So let's say if we're looking at this and, we want just, and it could be really kind of source dependent. Like, if you have a lot of space in your mix, you might have, like the difference between kind of like your medium, like source here, versus kind of the amplitude. So a lot of times people would, like and anticipate when we're working on something is just to, see something that kind of looks like that. Often kind of the solution when you want to kind of get, like the main part of the amplitude, that's just going to be like arranging. I think sometimes, people look for a technical solution. A lot of times it's arranging and what instruments you're using and, like the balance of the instruments. So sometimes, if you opened up like, a Steely Dan song and looked at it, I'll open up a Fleetwood Mac song. I won't play it for copyright reasons, but I'll open it up. I'll open up a couple of like classic songs so you could get a sense. I mean, we know that we're in loudness wars, but sometimes the loudness wars can go against your particular. So I'm going to open up, let's say, Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. Okay, I'm not going to play it. Makes for a great Spectral Layers demo. All right, so let's look at, the waveform here. So you would say that that's probably not a good crest factor there. So when you kind of look at it, you'd say, oh, that's not good. Obviously, that song did okay. Let's open up another file. Let's say The Pretenders. Brass in Pocket, I think I have. So let's come over here. All right, so you could look at that and say the crest factor isn't good. I think that mix sounds great. And let's look at Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne. Okay. There's like probably a little, that's probably more, but again, that's probably going to be the arrangement. But, don't be so, it's really easy to get, I think, overly concerned on crest factors and stuff like that. But I think often what it's showing is maybe, or what it's indicating is perhaps a musical arrangement problem. So I know it's always easier. I'm going to compress it more. I'm going to do this. And then why is it still not kind of getting the result? I would spend more time in the musical arrangements and see if you could find a solution to the problems around there. And Chazzy brings up a great point about the virtual keyboard. Make sure you disable it. All right, so we see Doughboy just says 10-4. Thank you, Greg. So you're welcome. All right, well, you see Pertti Komenen on from Finland. All right. All right, so we see Sable Winters. It says, Greg, I'm embarrassed to say that the MIDI remote script was created by ChatGPT. It's interesting. So we could see that ChatGPT doesn't know all the answers in making a MIDI remote script. You think it could be something it'd be good for, but obviously the ChatGPT did something wrong. But I would check the Akai websites and see. So is the controller you have, I think the script is for an Akai MPK88. I know that there are a number of Akai controllers. So I would check, like, if you go to the Steinberg forums, there's kind of a like an area where you could download different MIDI remote patch scripts. I'm sure Jazz Dude will share a link to the location, but you could simply just, I would look for there. If, we can see that AI wasn't a good solution for that. So maybe it'll be better in the future. So, but don't be embarrassed. I'm glad you shared that experience. All right, so we see from Flybees, I sent an email asking why when I drag a master track into the chord track, I get a whole bunch of notes appear. What am I doing wrong? So I know you sent over the project, and I think I emailed back, but I don't, I didn't have the actual audio file to kind of check out. But let's say if I want to do a couple of chord tracks, and so let's say we'll do like these 3 songs. I won't play them. All right, so let's say if I create a chord track here, and I drag this down, that it's going to, so we can see that's probably pretty good results. Now let's say if we do the same, let's just let's try Fleetwood Mac Dreams here. Drag that down. All right, knowing that song, that looks pretty accurate. Let's try Crazy Train. I've played that in bands 400 billion times. So that looks right. So the verse. So, if you're able to, maybe, I think it was like a Spotify track or something. But Vince, if you could maybe email or share an MP3 of the original track. So I got kind of the project, and I saw lots of different chords that were kind of on top of each other, but it was hard to get a sense of it without the original file intact. So if you're able to resend that, then I'd be happy to look at it for you. All right, Aaron asks, hey Greg, just to tack on a question about supervision, is there a way to change the measurement to LKFS instead of LUFS or LEQM? Okay, so I don't think so, but let's take a quick look. So like, if we're going to, let's say, our signal, and we go to level here, we go to our different, here we could choose, I'd say I'm not that familiar with, so when we're doing kind of, our normal like dB levels, but let's say if we come over here to our loudness meter and we go to our settings, so we could do loudness units or loudness units full scale. So I don't think it does LKFS, and I have to say I'm not that familiar with it, but I'll look it up after the live stream ends. All right, Soren just says, thanks, Greg, about the crest factor. So you're welcome. Thanks, Jazz Dude, for sharing the MIDI remote scripts made by users. All right, so we see FlyV just says, okay, I'll try to send it again later on with the master track that you're saying, with the master track. Yeah, so I think that the audio track that was missing was the one that was probably the analysis for the chords. And even if you just kind of send that particular, send it as an MP3 file, an email or something like that, that'd be fine as well, Vince. Thanks. All right, so we had a question mailed in. It says, hi, Greg, how are you doing? I've been using Cubase for a very long time, since 1992, starting with Cubeat on my Atari. Currently, I'm using Cubase 14 Pro. As you can imagine, I have a lot of older projects created in earlier versions of Cubase 10, 11, 12, 13. The issue I'm running into now is when I open up one of those older projects in Cubase 14 Pro, some of the VST3 instruments either fail to load because they are missing, or they suddenly run in demo mode, even though I still have those same instruments installed and working in the current version of Cubase. Is there a way to resolve this and make sure my older projects load correctly in Cubase 14 Pro? So, a couple of things that could be is, so you mentioned that they're all VST3 versions, so I would check to make sure that they're all VST3 versions. It could be when you go into your VST plugin manager, check to see if they're not showing up here. They could be in the block list. So usually as versions kind of grow, they could be a little tighter with adding different plugins to the block list. And that block list is often, when it determines, because you may notice like the first time that you actually start Cubase, that it will start to do, like the plugins will do like a quick little, you see all the plugins kind of scanning by. So it does like a quick integrity check. And it also does, let me clear my throat. And it will also do kind of like, testing for the latency of the particular plugin. So sometimes as the systems grow, like as new versions come out, those tolerances can be, tweaked a little bit. So just make sure that they're not showing up in your block list. Most plugins, and also just, a lot of people think that they're all VST3 plugins, but by default, if you're on the Windows platform, when you open this up in Cubase 14, or you may see a VST2 plugins enable. So so by default, VST2 plugins, I know you mentioned that they're VST3, but VST2 plugins are disabled by default, but you could still enable them. I'm running in Apple Silicon, so I don't have this, but if you're running in Apple Rosetta mode, you would still see the Enable VST2 plugins icon here, and then that would allow you to run the VST2. So if you have the capability, just make sure that, and see if you turn on VST2 plugins and set their paths if they show up. And if there's particular plugins, some plugins were discontinued, I think in 13, going from 12 to 13, I think that discontinued like some of the earlier instruments. And there's some ways around that online if you needed to have like Embracer or some of the earlier instruments for particular projects. But, just because... And then you could still open up the projects in Cubase 12 or 13 and render if necessary, if you have projects that are utilizing some of those particular plugins. All right. All right. Roberto Grajeda asks, can you advance to a specific point in a sample if it is linked to the project time while playing on MediaBay? Okay. So I'll just do a new project here. All right. And let's say we're playing along. I'll just do a quick drum beat just to give us like a reference point that we're playing. So I'll just add a drum track here. Okay, so we have kind of a 4 on the floor. And I'll just change my tempo a little slower. Okay, so just reread this. Can you advance to a specific point in the sample if it is linked to the project time while playing on MediaBay? So I'm going to just come over here. Let's audition some drum loops or just some other loops. All right, so let's say, okay, I want to do okay, and let me just so I think that once we have musical mode enabled here, but if you just kind of click, you'll see a pencil icon appear. So it's not going to be in sync, but if we enable musical mode, then it's going to wait. So if I switch loops like right after it plays, so let's say after this finishes, so if you don't want it to be in sync and you want it to start playing, you can just kind of come right over here and just click and start playback from anywhere. But if it's in musical mode and you select the loop, it'll kind of start on the next downbeat of that loop so that it's in sync when you're working on it. So if I switch in the middle here, but if musical mode is turned off, then anywhere I click. And then you could also set up just a small section of the loop and drag in that portion of the loop that was kind of cut right there. So a couple of things to try. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so we have Lawrence Koch. Says, Greg, any issues with MacOS Tahoe that's coming out in Cubase 14? So I think it's been pretty stable. I haven't really, usually our IT department at Yamaha for my work computer, they don't really like us upgrading, just the quintessential IT department that doesn't want anything to change and kind of mess up their IT infrastructure, so which part of my computer is part of the Yamaha network. So they tend to not let us upgrade immediately while they do their own testing. But I haven't had any, any particular issues that I've heard of. So it seems to be a pretty seamless transition from, the previous operating system to the new system. But maybe other people if other people have had experience, positive or negative, maybe they could share share what they've experienced. Okay. Okay, so we see Roberto just says, yes, thanks. All right. We have Gerald Ely joining from Martinez, California. Thanks for joining. Hope you're well. And we see Gerald has been granted 1 gallon of chocolate eclair ice cream. I guess that's the ice cream flavor for people from Northern California for today. All right, Michael Teams wants people to smash the like button. And we see Sable saying hi to Gerald. All right, let me just get to another question that we had mailed in. Sorry, let me mute my monitoring computer. Okay, so we had a question. I think this was on a live stream maybe last week, maybe last Friday or last Tuesday. It was just a comment that was in the chat field I caught. Says what the user was probably asking is the track starts off at its normal speed, and then after the culmination and towards the end, it slows down. Okay, so let's see if we could take a track and have it kind of slow down over time. Okay. Revert this. I'll do a quick tempo detection of this track. Just so we have kind of a reference to it. So I'm going to go to my project, to my tempo track. Okay, so let's say we're so I'm going to say like this, I'm going to assign this file here tempo. It seems like it's 88 beats a minute. So I'm going to go to my pool window and I will just change the tempo definition here to 88 beats a minute. So let's say if we want this track to speed up and like as we're kind of working with our tempo, now I'm going to place this track into musical mode, and we want this track just to kind of slow down. All right, so say we're like 88 beats a minute. All right, so if we open up our tempo editor, and we can say, okay, I want this track to start here and then gradually just kind of slow down. I could just do this, and this way as we play the track, so the track we know what the tempo is, I'm going to place it into musical mode right here. So as we play, we're going to be at kind of our normal tempo, and then we want the track to just kind of slow way down over time. I'll turn off the metronome. So again, just placing it into musical mode, assigning a tempo to the track. We can now just come over here, and as we draw in a tempo change, we can go down to about a third of the original tempo. So, but that's how you could do it. So, sorry if I misunderstood that particular question on the other live stream. All right. So we see question, how can I use guitar effects and record? Okay, so a lot of times when we want to record with guitar effects, so let's say if we want to take, so let's say if we have a recording here, and this is going to be just kind of a dry guitar part, and so let's say we'll listen to this. All right, so let's say if I wanted to put, so often when we go to like your mix console, if we come over and we look at the inserts for particular tracks, let's say we go to distortion and we have like the VST amp rack. When the VST amp rack is actually on the channel, we hear the recorded signal of the guitar, and it's going to play back through the VST amp rack. Now there's two different modes on your audio interface. Your audio interface could be in direct monitoring or not in direct monitoring. And what direct monitoring does to minimize the latency for the monitoring path, it basically takes the input and sends it, and what it does is it sends it directly to the output so that you have, basically minimal latency. So almost like, imperceptible latency. But when you do that, it doesn't play back through any of the plugins. So if you're kind of playing in real time and recording and you have the insert effect and you're not hearing like the guitar amp, you would need to come over here, select your audio interface, and make sure that direct monitoring isn't turned on. If you're in a Mac OS, for most audio interfaces, you may have to go out to the control panel for your audio interface and turn off direct monitoring there. And you could, enable, disable direct monitoring there. It's not a standard part of core audio for some reason. Now, if you want to record with the guitar processed with the plugins, all you would have to do is you would see an input channel. So the input channel, so anytime that we have an input that's defined in our particular audio connections, so if I add a couple of buses, so say I want to add 3 mono inputs, we could now come over here and we see that these inputs are connected. So if I'm positive that I love this particular guitar sound, when I come over, I could open up the input channel that track is assigned to, and I could open the particular amp rack, and then that amp rack is going to be assigned. And when you play the guitar, if the insert is on the input channel, that input will be recorded. Now we can't undo that recording. You can assign one physical connection to 2 different inputs and have one recorded dry and one recorded through the guitar in case you wanted to change the sound or reamp it later. But if you want to basically embed and record the guitar sound through effects, you would do it on the input channel, and to monitor the guitar with the effects, you would place the guitar effects on the insert or the send of the particular channel you're recording to. So that's going to be playback, but it will play back the unaffected guitar and it's processed through here. But again, to record through the amp rack, put it on the input channel as an insert, and that way that guitar amp is embedded and will be captured during the recording process. Okay, reading through comments. So Graham Witchers just says, do you know what? I've been on the live stream for an hour now, and I've forgotten to hit the like button. But he's hit it now. All right, so we see Sven Isaacson. It says, speaking of the block list, on occasion I've had plugins being dumped in the block list by Cubase Pro, but not by Nuendo, and vice versa. Any idea what's going on? So sometimes if a plugin, I think that if a plugin, I could be mistaken, that if a plugin does cause a crash a couple of times, that it may be put into a block list. So if a plugin has caused a crash on Cubase but not Nuendo, you may see that there may be different results in the block list because maybe that plugin didn't misbehave in Nuendo or it did in Cubase or vice versa. So it could be related to that. Let's see. Uno Momento strategy is to make it a habit to hit the like button every time you open up a stream. That's what he does. So he doesn't have to worry about anyone whining to him about not hitting the like button. All right, Yazian Tribi Music says, is it possible to copy, paste, duplicate the stereo in output as a copy mix window next to the stereo output? So you want to copy, paste, duplicate the stereo in output as a copy mix window next to the stereo. So I'm not sure if you want, so let's say we have our inputs and let's say our outputs, and if we wanted our inputs over there, so let's get to the visibility, to zones, and then I'm going to, and sometimes you may not, so let's see if we go to our inputs, let me route, I think we may have to see, but we could take our input here and then move, let's see if we move that over to the right, and we have our stereo out to the right, but you may not see it until like the input is routed somewhere. So let's say if I come here, let me just add a couple of audio tracks. So let's say we have mono in 1, but you could just simply kind of come over here and then, so like here's our stereo in track, but once we have that there, you could just simply move, so you could select kind of your input here and then go to visibility to zones, and then you could have it on the left or in the right zone. Okay, so we see from Sven, says when the plugins are dumped in the block list, it happens immediately. The first time Cubase and Window tries to open it, no crashes. So I'm not sure, there's one scan at the start, but I think if plugins do cause crashes, that they could be moved into the block list. All right, so we see from Uno Memento says I mostly use live musicians on drums or sometimes Easy Drummer. I'm not very familiar with Groove Agent, but I'd like to learn. Can you, Greg, show me the basics of it, please? Okay. So let's take a look at kind of the basics of Groove Agent. So Groove Agent's kind of a very powerful tool, I think, like especially when you're starting. What I like about Groove Agent is, sometimes I find it, it could be a little uninspiring playing with a click track. I'm by training a bassist, so I like playing with drummers. So when I come over here, now Groove Agent, we could think of it as being almost two different types, and I think that there's kind of like two schools of drum plugins. One that's kind of like a virtual instrument, and I think Easy Drummer would fall into that category. If you were doing more kind of following the paradigm of an Akai MPC, like a sampling drum machine, I would say that's probably the other paradigm. So when we open up Groove Agent, we could work with both of those paradigms. So I'm going to right click on the agent here and we'll load a kit. So we have like acoustic agent, which will be like a virtual drummer, and beat agent. So I'll start with like the studio kit here. I like often to start off with Forget the Past as a preset. So we have our instrument here. We could click on the particular instrument. Now if I wanted to change the tone, I could say, okay, I want to adjust the tuning on the snare. And let's say I want to add more room mic in the snare to blend that in, or more overheads and less room mic. So we could adjust all those different elements on different drum sounds as we click. Now when we get a pattern, a lot of people get hung up in this. They start off with like an intro. So if we click on follow transport, when I hit play, Groove Agent will just play. Now it may start with like we see green pattern. So we have kind of instrument sounds, and then we have patterns. And we have different colors of patterns. So the blue will indicate fills. The green is going to be introductions. And then we have the reds, which will be endings. So go, stop. And we have generally, if you have Groove Agent SE, you have these 8 middle patterns. So if I select this pattern and I just hit play in Cubase, it's going to play along. So that's probably more inspiring to start writing a song. If I change the tempo, this will automatically follow. So say, okay, I want it to be 108. So now these yellow patterns have some interesting things that we could do. I want to come over and let's adjust our dynamic. So I go vertically. I can have it play very soft. And there could be like 32 velocity layers per key. So vertical would be our dynamics. And then we could also have your levels of complexity. So you have 16 levels of complexity for each one of these patterns. Now each of the patterns we could also have a halftime feel. Okay, and let's say every 4 measures I wanted to do a drum fill. So at the end of 4 measures, it's randomly going to play a drum fill. Now we could also have this level of this auto complexity. So I'm going to say, okay, we could say every measure, it could do 2 levels up or down from its current complexity level. So it's not playing the same thing over and over and over again. There's like the subtle different variations that we could have. And let's say, okay, I want the crash only, I want the crash off because I don't want to crash it every 4 measures. And we could also just kind of switch if we want the ride to not have a bell, or hi-hat if we want to be tip or shank. So if I actually want to take this particular pattern over, all I'd have to do is just drag this to my project, and then I have the pattern right there. I could also record this. So if I go to this particular track, and if you record, you may want to just click on this little icon here. So when you're in the pattern, so we could audition your different sounds in the instrument. We come over here. And as we're kind of, let's say I want to record, I'm going to go to the inspector here, and Groove Agent will actually output the MIDI data. So if it's kind of randomly, doing different things, we could just capture that as MIDI data here. So you can see. Now, also when we go to the instrument, we can go to the mixer. So I could come over here and we can say, okay, I want to go to my aux send, so I want a reverb. Let's add a delay on aux send 2. So when I go to my snare, I could add more reverb. Or if I want to add a little delay. Let's put some delay in a hi-hat. Also, every single track here will have EQ. So if I want to EQ just the kick drum, or if I want to put a compressor on the kick, or let's select the snare and add a compressor. Let's go to tape saturation or my envelope shaper. So, but again, everything that I just did was recorded, and it just kind of you load it up with a basic starting pattern, and then you could write with it and then add fills, do little variations as you need to, but just kind of starting with inspiration. I think Groove Agent is a kind of a perfect tool for that. So let me know if you want to see more on the side of the Beat Agent as well. I'd be happy to show that, but kind of in relation to Easy Drummer, I think that workflow probably makes sense. Okay. All right, we have a question from FlyV. Says, what's a shortcut to hide the faders again, Greg? I'll write it down. So I don't think there's one that's assigned by default. But if you want to hide the faders in the mixer, let me just add a number of audio tracks so we could. So you'll see like this little setup window right here. So the setup window layout, and then you could just hide faders. And then if we want to assign a keyboard shortcut for that, we'll come over here to key commands. And then I think it's going to be under mix console or mixer. So we say show hide fader. So if I come over here, I'll just assign a keyboard shortcut to it. I'll use Command, Option, or Alt, Control, Shift, F. So now when I'm here and I want to see my inserts and sends, I could just hide the faders with the keyboard shortcut, or we could assign that to a button on your MIDI remote as well. So now we can say, okay, I want to see my inserts and sends. I want to hide the faders. You could just toggle it like so. So again, go to your edit menu, do key commands, and then under mixer, show hide fader. All right, so Sable is asking, says, by the way, does Sound Paint enhancer, is it redundant to Cubase Pro 14 features? So I'm not sure. I don't know what Sound Paint is. But you see Jazzy says he uses it with all free instruments in Cubase Innuendo. All right, so we see Sable Winters saying, is Sign competitive to Contact 7 full version? I own that, but I don't use it. So I think Sign is maybe, is it the orchestral tools player? So I think instead of having to use like a playback engine of Contact, that they've just developed their own. So I think that's what Sign is, but I could be mistaken. All right, so we see Innomento just says, thanks, Greg. Very informative presentation on Groove Agent. I'll have to try that out on the suitable song. All right, always wonderful to see Michael Pierce. Great to see you on the Zoom social. All right, let me go back to some of the more questions that were mailed in. All right, another question. Can you copy only the notes from a MIDI track to another track without sysx data, etc.? Okay. So let's say I have another instrument track here. All right, and I just want, so say I have an event. So now what I want to do is to select just the notes here. So I'll just come over here. Okay, we're going to select those notes. I'm going to copy. So just Command or Control plus the letter C for copy. Let's go here, and then I'm going to hit Alt or Option plus V. So a lot of times we do like Control C or Command C for copy, Command C or Command V, Control V to paste. But when we paste, it's actually going to be using the cursor as a position. If I use Alt or Option plus V, that will automatically copy those particular notes directly to that track in the same time position. So if you want it to be the same time, you can copy the events. If you want it at the same time, use Alt or Option plus V. If you want it to go to where the cursor is, hit Command or Control plus V. So that's how you can copy notes without any of the controller data. So if we have, let's say in here, undo that copy. So let's say I have tons of controller data here. So I want to, let's say we have a lot of modulation information. All right, so now I just want to copy the notes from here. So copy, open this part, Alt V, and we can see all of our notes. But when we go to the controller data and we open up our modulation, we didn't copy that, so we selected just the notes, and then we could paste just the notes wherever we want without worrying about all of the MIDI CC or sysx data. All right, next question. Can you transpose a chord track visually? Okay, so let me just jump back to this project here. Okay, so let's say I have my chord track laid out for me here, and I want to do a transposition on the chord track. Okay, so if I select the particular chords here, so I want to transpose these up, we will see just a root note. So let's say we're in the key of C major here, and I want it to go to D major. I would select the root note here, and then we could just simply come right over here, and all the selected notes will transpose up. If for some reason you don't see the root note over here, there's a chance that it could be lurking all the way over here, kind of being all lonely on the far right-hand side here. So just be aware that, and you could right-click and just make sure that you have the root note showing if you don't see it at all. And then you could pick and choose if you want it on the left side of the dividing line or the right side. So, but just simply select those particular chords, and you want to just select the chords, not the scale, and at that point set your root note accordingly. So now we want to be in the key of F major or to C sharp major, and if you wanted to do your enharmonic shift, we could just switch that from D flat to C sharp like that. All right, next question. Can you save the notation editor in Cubase as a PDF? Okay, so let's come over here. Let's open this track as our score editor. All right, let me come over. Okay, so I'll just okay, so we have a number of sheets of music here, right? So if we want to, so I'm going to, once we're in the score editor, I'm going to export as a PDF. So we'll call this October 3rd PDF score. I'm going to save it to, I'll just put an A so we can find it. We'll save it to our desktop. So I hit save. Let's go look at our desktop. We'll navigate to our desktop here. All right, so here's our PDF. So I'll double click, and now our PDF is automatically been created directly from the score editor. So you might have to have the score editor open, and then when the score editor is open, then go to your file menu to export as a PDF. So once we're here, file, export PDF file. All right, let's jump back, see if we have some more live questions. Okay. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, so we see from Mike, it says how to use automation on EQs to make effects on tracks. Okay. All right, so I'll revert this quickly. So let's say we want to do like some EQ sweeps to create kind of like filter effects on a track. Okay, so let's say we're starting here. Right, so I'm going to open up the channel EQ here. All right, so what I want to do now is click on the W. And then I'm going to just move. So now if we just rewind and play back. And we'll see where the automation comes in. Thought I automated it, so let's just come here. There we go. So So that's how you can automate the EQ mic. Okay, in a memento wants people to whack the like button. Right, Sven just says that sign is the Orchestral Tools proprietary player. So thanks for the confirmation. That's what I thought. All right, Yazian just says he really likes the mixing way. All right. Okay, reading through comments here. All right, so FlyV just says, what was I supposed to add to the track? I'll send it to you to see why my chord track is unordered. So just the, I think that you probably dragged an audio file to the chord track like I did. Just make sure that the audio file is just like I don't need the Cubase project, but if it's the audio file, where's, if you put on Dropbox, obviously respect copyright. But if you have like the audio file that you're trying to derive the chords from, if you could send that audio file so I could take a look at it, then I'll be able to see what's going on. Okay, so we see for Mike, so just click on W and that directly records. Yeah, so you can think of the W as being write, so writing automation, and the R is read or reading automation. So when you click on write, read will be enabled by default. So all right. Michael Team says that was a revelation of the day. Cool. FlyV says, what's the use of read and write? The difference. So again, write. So if we have this automation here, so to record the automation, if I just have read on, and I move my frequency here, we hear it, but it's not recorded. If I click on the right, and we can see that as I move, that records. We can see where the cursor is in a project. That's recording that. So if I didn't want that automation to play back, that value would remain static on it. The automation would be static on channel. And as soon as I click on R to read the automation, that's when, if I click on R to turn off read, then the automation will stop reading. Okay. See, Mike just says, thank you for showing, so you're welcome. All right, so we see Sable just saying, I preferred the transport panel in version 10. So the transport hasn't changed since it changed in version 10. It's been the same. If you want a floating transport, a lot of times, we had a floating transport and people would complain that the transport was always having to move the transport out of the way. But if you still want kind of like a floating transport, if you come over here to the transport panel, we could activate it here and move the transport around if you want to. I find it convenient to have it kind of anchored at the bottom. And then I don't, because with the floating transport, if I moved it out of the way, and I needed to do like resize, I would have to move this out of the way and then resize. Or if it was at the top of the event, I wanted to do a fade out, I could sometimes have to come over here, move that, and then do the control. But it had changed in Cubase 10 from Cubase 9. But since it's been the same since 10 through 14, and probably in the future. All right, Yazian asks, question, is it possible to rename, copy, stereo in, rename it? So let's say we have our mix console here, we have stereo in, so go to your studio menu to audio connections, and let's say, okay, let's call it Yazian. And now it's the Yazian input right there. So just go into your studio menu to audio connections and then double click on the name, and then you could rename it there. Okay. Mike just says, thank you so much. All right, Uno Memento says, Spectral Layers is a bit new to me, but I would like to separate a vocal from one audio track. I have the Cubase 14 Pro and Spectral Layers. How do I do it? Okay. So we'll come over. Okay, so let's say we have all right, so what you want to do is, I have this one kind of pre-done, but I'll show you. So we're going to select the event or the track. We could come over here in extensions, and I'm going to have it as Spectral Layers. So then when you double click, it's going to launch it in Spectral Layers in the lower zone. you'll see a module. And here you can see unmixed song or unmixed vocal, depending on which level of spectral layers you have. And it may take a minute or two. And then once you do that, you'll see, so then when it's unmixed, it shows up here as different layers. So if I want to,
above the ground, does it bring you up to hear your friends talk down? Then when a different broken goes coming back to give you one.
And with the full version of Spectral Layers, we can come over. I can take the drums. The version that comes with Cubase, which is Spectral Layers Go, that is going to allow you to do vocals. If you have Pro version, you could do drums, brass, guitar, piano, as well as drums. You could separate hi-hat, rides, toms, kicks, and snares. But then you could just come over here. And then if you want to do processing on that, so I could just come here and say, the vocal's not loud enough. And then you could even just drag it out to a track, and then it will make your audio track here.
Tell you something everyone knows by now. Something that everyone's figured out.
So if I wanted to apply, add a delay to it.
Let me say you walk a foot above the ground. Does it bring you up to hear your friends talk down? And when a different broken ego rose, coming back to give you what you're owed. Rude Judy, I wouldn't know by now. I didn't figure it out. Rude Judy, I wouldn't know by now. Then you turn away somehow. You caught up on an attitude and it shows. Stepped on one too many toes. That I doesn't.
So then you could re-EQ, apply effects, and kind of, I often refer to it as unbaking the cake. So that's how you could do it, Uno. So play around with it. You got a license for Spectral Layers 1. Enjoy. Have fun unmixing your vocals. All right, Michael Pierce says, my transport only ever floats. No idea why, but I seem to like it that way. So if you want your transport to show up at the bottom, if you just kind of click in this little setup window, you could just say transport at the bottom or not. So go to the setup window of the project, and then you could just hide or show your transport bar. So try with the fixed transport. I understand, if you're used to it, but I think it's nice to have it kind of out of the way a lot of times. Graham Witcher's telling everyone to get a new Hot Mess record. All right, so we see from Uno Memento says Spectral Layers is an amazing widget. Thanks, Greg, except that the basic version doesn't include anything other than the basic Spectral Layers, which I can only separate a song or maybe something else. So it's going to do the vocal, but if you have the full Spectral Layers, you could obviously do a lot more. Michael Pierce says he likes being hot on the F2 key for his transport panel. All right, let me jump to a couple other questions that were mailed in. All right, next question. Is there a tool to analyze the sample drum sound so that Cubase automatically finds or suggests a comparable sound from the MediaBay? So there isn't really any like analysis of it that will say, you know, find a particular sample. You know, you could, you know, when you're in MediaBay, you can have different tagging. So let's say if I was looking in MediaBay and I was looking for, on this computer, a snare sample, and I was looking for a snare that was good for pop music or good for electronic music, and I want this, you know, so we could kind of search for, you know, like different audio files. So let's say, okay, I want to find audio files, and I want it to be in a particular folder. So say, okay, I want it to be in my documents folder. So we could just kind of come over and, you know, so if you have different elements that are tagged, you know, we can just come over here and say, okay, I'm looking for snare drums, and I'm looking for snare drums for rap or hip hop music. That's a one shot. So we could kind of isolate, but there isn't going to be like, oh, you know, automatically find a snare that's similar to this one, because we may not know exactly, you know, a lot of times, you know, there isn't like an analysis tool to kind of to classify different sounds, and our analysis perceptions may be different than your analysis perceptions, you know. So what is, you know, an 808 drum machine was originally kind of intended almost for accordion players, and you wouldn't necessarily think of it as being kind of the, you know, when it was released, it wasn't really deemed kind of the hip hop machine. It became, you know, it basically became, you know, sometimes gear like TB303s, you know, were kind of in a, you know, weren't successful, and 808s and 909s weren't very successful when they were released, but then they became kind of so degraded reputation-wise that a lot of people picked them up inexpensively and started making music with them, and created a genre based on from using those particular tools. So then it's considered kind of a hip-hop drum machine, but it may have been designed for accordion players originally and was a failure at that. And then when it's kind of the inexpensive piece of gear to get, then, you know, it's kind of like a neighborhood that gets gentrified. You know, people use this, and it's what the tools that they have access to, and then it becomes something. So sometimes the classifications don't, you know, so there isn't like an automatic analysis for classification. All right. So I have a song in E major that is transposed at the end to F major. How can I set Cubase so that it shows the chord as B flat instead of A sharp in this case? Thanks. Okay, so let's say if we jump over. Just open up in our project here. Okay, so let's say we are in E major. So let's say I'll transpose this up to E major. All right, and then we want these to be F major. All right, so if we have a chord that's showing as kind of an A sharp or a B flat, so if we select that particular chord and we see the enharmonic shift, so if I want it to be A sharp, I could just select that chord and see A sharp. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So I would go to the enharmonic shift and select the flat, and then that would automatically switch that that particular chord from A sharp to B flat. So again, right here, the enharmonic shift Usually tries to do a good job, but if you wanted to switch it to a flat or sharp, you can just toggle the chord representation there. Okay, we got that. All right, let me jump back over to live questions. Okay, reading through. Flyv says, looks like I could get a taste of Spectral Layers. So yeah. All right, Sable Winter says, 23 minutes left. I'm praying to the goddess Osmosis. I wake up tomorrow in expert mode. So we see Yazian just ask, is there a Cubase project for movie scoring? I would check out, there is a template. So let's say if we come over here and we go to new project, go to, I think it's under production templates, you'll see symphonic orchestra. So as soon as we go to that template, we can open that template up, and then this would be kind of using Iconicus Sketch. So now when you come over here, you could say, okay, I have my violin 1. And let's say I want to do piccolo over here. So we could just, or if you want to do flute. So this is more of an orchestral. But obviously some film scores will be orchestral based. Some will be using electronics. Some will be obviously hybrids between electronics and orchestral. So it's really whatever you need. So you could kind of start off with that if you're doing orchestral work. But most people and most composers are very kind of intimately familiar with their templates, and they live and die by their templates because they may have 4,000-ish type of sounds loaded up in a template that are immediately accessible. So when they get an instrument, they look for, they may buy an instrument and, and add 3 or 4 sounds of that instrument to their scoring template, and it's like, when I need a bell, I'm going to do this. When I need a flutter type of sound, when I need to go to commercial, I need a kind of, orchestral crescendo. I have that sound here, and they just have all those sounds loaded up so they're not kind of going through choice paralysis, going through tens of thousands of different sounds. All right, I think we have one more question that was mailed in. Does Cubase 14 have a multiple assignable macro function? Okay, so let's pop over here. So let's say I want to go to a particular track. So let's say on, we'll say here, I'm going to have a number of plugins. So let's say so if we come over to the modulators, we can now we could add a macro knob. All right, so I'm going to come over here. I want to adjust the volume. So I'm going to click on the plus sign. We'll adjust our volume. All right, also I want to go to, let's come over here. Let's say our dynamics. Let's go to black valve. I want to adjust this parameter. Let's go to the channel EQ. So I want to adjust this parameter for my third. So now when I come over here, I can move this one knob and control all of those different parameters with one single knob. And if I wanted to control that knob from a control surface, all I would have to do is to right click and we'll say, let's go to our MIDI remote. I will select, let's say I'll just come over here. I want this knob. And I'm going to apply the mapping. So now when I move this knob on my control surface, that will open up and control my plugins, my volume, and my EQ all simultaneously. And we could have different levels of that as well. So use the macro function in the modulators. So again, the modulators, when we go to add a modulator, I think we could have 8 different ones, but just go to your macro knob here and start assigning away. Have all sorts of fun. So we see from Mike says, oh wow, this macro function seems very powerful and full of possibilities. All right. Jazzy speculating that maybe we'll get more modulators in the next version. All right. All right, so I think we are out of questions. We'll give it a couple minutes and see if any other questions come up. Give it a couple minutes, and there's usually about 20 to 30 seconds. So once again, the index will probably be later tonight or maybe tomorrow, depending. I have to go to kind of like a little social meetup for my son's class tonight. So depending what time I get back, I'll start on it, and I have an orchestra rehearsal tomorrow for a concert tomorrow or on Sunday. So it may be a little later than usual, so just a heads up. We'll see if there's any other questions that pop in. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. And you can always send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so Sable is just asking Greg, do you remember what the version 9 transport looked like? Yeah, so I remember like the version 9 transport, so in comparison, was more kind of often like a little bit taller. So it was maybe twice as tall and not as long horizontally. And it didn't have kind of different sections. So, I think, most of everything is still there. And what's kind of nice about this is you can kind of hide or expand different areas. So where you see kind of the 3 little dots, that means that you could extend that out to see more items. And you could always have this transport like below the project window if you wanted to see more parameters. But I like having it kind of fixed to the bottom, so I'm not constantly moving it in and out of the way. So, all right, Gerald Ely just says, thanks, Greg. Have a great weekend. See everybody next week. And John Costigan says he wants to thank Greg, Jazzy, Agent K, and Jan, and Mike Teams, and all the Cubase wizards who make it all possible. So thanks for your kind words, John. All right. All right, Mike says, yes, thanks for the live tutorial. Have a great weekend. Well, thanks for joining us today. Hopefully we'll see you on more live streams. All right, so with that, I think we are out of time. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions, and we'll see everyone back at Tuesday, 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you back Tuesday. Thank you so much, and goodbye.